little bit into the start of the meeting right now. We may have more people joining us as we go, but we can go ahead and get started since we do only have an hour. I just want to, first of all, thank everybody for joining today. This is a meeting from Drive Electric Tennessee that's being organized by two DET Drive Electric Tennessee partners, Middle West Tennessee Clean Fuels and East Tennessee Clean Fuels. It is regarding the publication of a new EV ride and drive event guide. But just at the top, some housekeeping items. We are going to keep everybody muted for the time being. There's going to be some talking points from me as well as from Jonathan Overly from East Tennessee Clean Fuels to kind of introduce the ride and drive in Tennessee context, go through the actual event guide itself, and at the end we'll save some time for a Q&A session. And we're lucky to be joined by a number of folks outside of even the Tennessee Clean Fuels coalitions that have hosted these types of ride and drives before, some of them being from EV owners clubs and other types of associations in Tennessee that have a vested interest in promoting EV adoption. So that Q&A session will be at the end. Of course, at that time, we'll be able to unmute microphones and let people kind of chat collaboratively. But if you have questions when things kind of pop up and you don't want to lose it in case you forget it before the end of that Q&A session, just note that there is a chat box in the Zoom. You can enter all of your questions there, and we'll make sure to get to those later on. Virginia, our DET coordinator and fearless chat box moderator here, she'll be keeping track of your questions until the end. So again, my name is Shauna Basquez. I am appearing to you all live from my kitchen, but I work with Middle West Tennessee Clean Fuels, and that agency is housed with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Today, again, we're going to all be meeting to talk about hosting electric vehicle ride and drives. Obviously, a lot of those events were put on hold in 2020 and might still be put on hold for some of 2021 until it's safe to have those kinds of person-to-person interactions. But we know that it is going to be something that we'll return to when the time is right. And we know that in the past, it's been a very great opportunity to kind of get butts in seats, get people exposed to electric vehicles, demystify the technologies, and really make people more confident in choosing electric vehicles as a future alternative with their transportation and commuting behaviors. Ooh, there we go. So Drive Electric Tennessee as a whole, obviously, some of you might be familiar with us, but we did form.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go for it.
Are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, I am. Can you see?
Oh, it's just in my view, it's got it flipped. My apologies. You're good.
No, thanks for keeping that out. If you see something funny, just be sure to shout something out, Jonathan. But Drive Electric Tennessee, it is a consortium of a whole lot of different types of stakeholders. And we have a few of the members that are listed on the screen here. They encompass local power companies, utility presences, EVSE, electric vehicle supply equipment, manufacturers and distributors, Clean Cities coalitions, state agencies, and then there's a number of other types of entities that we couldn't fit on this slide here, but everyone pitching in together to kind of complete work to advance electric vehicle adoption. And one of the key resources that Drive Electric Tennessee has published so far is an electric vehicle roadmap that was published in January 2019. That roadmap has informed the kind of prioritization of projects that the group is accomplishing, and all of these projects are geared toward improving EV adoption. So here's a fun fact. As of Q4 2020, there were 11,000 electric vehicles already registered in Tennessee. That might feel like small potatoes, and in some ways, with regard to the millions of vehicles that are in Tennessee, it is, but that is a very steadily growing number. The year before that, there were 9,000. The year before that, there were closer to 6,000. So, we're seeing steady progress in the number of EV registrations that are coming into the state. And Drive Electric Tennessee's ultimate goal is to actually increase EV adoption overall to 200,000 vehicles by 2028. So we know that that is a very ambitious goal to become an EV leader for the Southeast, but we do think it's achievable. And this project, our meeting today, is one of the things that we're doing to try and continue to increase those numbers in the future. So what we're going to be talking about today is giving a little bit of background on the Drive Electric Tennessee EV Awareness Working Group, talking about what electric vehicle ride and drives in Tennessee already look like and who's been organizing those in the past. And then we're going to spend the majority of our time today walking through the EV Ride and Drive event guide, the different types of resources and information that are included in there. And at the end, we'll save time for that question and answer session that I mentioned at the top of the hour. So, Driving EV Awareness Working Group. Drive Electric Tennessee focuses on several opportunity areas to accelerate EV adoption across the state. It includes EV awareness, which is the group that kind of brought you this project today, but there's other opportunity area teams that are working on things like programs and projects and infrastructure availability in Tennessee. So EV awareness, though, that's the one that we're going to be talking about today. That's the one where we're trying to increase opportunities for public EV education and engagement, for example, by promoting electric vehicle ride and drives. So for EV awareness, there's a specific task force, EV Ride and Drives Task Force. I'm the chair of that task force, and I'm joined by all of the lovely people that you can see there: Marty Young, Joe Ozegovich, David Rivnak, Kent Midno, Dory Larson, and Tony Orlando. You can see that they're all from different kind of walks of life in the EV world. We got some EVSE people, some advocates, some EV Owners Club representatives that have all kind of pitched in on providing guidance to this process. And the mission of our small team is to make sure that we're developing guidance that helps you all be able to host EV ride and drives in the future. Or, you know, if you're already skilled in this area, it's something that you can easily pass off to, you know, your site hosts or to your other event partners that might not have as much experience, and let them know kind of what to expect for planning this type of event. I do want to give very brief background to other projects that the DET EV awareness team is working on. That includes EV charging station signage, EV chapter development, development of EV case studies, EV dealership engagement, and digital EV marketing. We'll have more information on all of those things on the DET website in the future, but just know that there's a variety of different types of projects, all informed by that EV roadmap I mentioned earlier that the Awareness Working Group is pitching in on. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Jonathan Overly of East Tennessee Clean Fuels pretty quickly, just to talk about EV ride and drives in Tennessee, how those are being held, who's kind of great resources for that information. Jonathan, you can just let me know when you want me to progress the slides.
Yes, ma'am, will do. So we are just one kind of arm of some of the different people. And when I say that, I mean East Tennessee Clean Fuels and Middle West Tennessee Clean Fuels, of the folks that have done ride drives in Tennessee over time. I think most of you all probably know the folks that have done that the longest are Electric Auto Association chapters. There's 3 of those in Tennessee. It's either 2 or 3. I think we lost one a few years ago. But they have been some of the folks that took a leadership role many moons ago in doing these. You know, as Clean Cities coalitions have come in and ramped up operations, and depending on where you were, they have started either helping EAA chapters or doing some of their own events or coordinating to do more than one event in some years, like we have done, at least in the Knoxville area, as East Tennessee Clean Fuels, based out of Knoxville, works with KIVA, the Knoxville Electric Vehicle Association. But yeah, we've kind of got a map of these folks across Tennessee, but the idea is to create more of these. So, and go back one, if you will, Shauna. Yeah, you know, that was from an event in, if I remember correctly, in Crossville, Tennessee earlier this year. But, you know, and you don't know who's who in this photo, but about a third of the people in the photo are members of the local EAA chapter that we hope become members of the Drive Electric Tennessee chapter in the not too distant future, who partnered with us in an event there. Next slide, Shauna. This was an event that was in Nashville. You can actually see Ryan in the red shirt on the right, who was one of the leaders for this event, and we hope will become one of the co-chairs or leaders for a Drive Electric Tennessee Nashville chapter in the future. And then that was a separate event, I think, in Knoxville, where we had some smart cars, which I am sad to say are no longer produced and sold, but just some examples of other events that have gone on in Tennessee. Next, Shauna. I think everybody knows about National Drive Electric Week and Drive Electric Earth Day. If you have not heard the acronyms NDO and DEED, that's what they're for, right at the top. National Drive Electric Week, NDO. Some people don't like to call it that, but we do for speed. And then Drive Electric Earth Day, which are huge opportunities with the assistance of Plug in America and their partners that have created the website and the way to put all our information together for how to do an event and to have people list themselves as if they're coming. So just know that those are really great tools we may not spend a lot of time on today. Most of you all probably already know those. And that's just a shot of the National Drive Electric Week website on that page. Next, Shauna. Yeah, this is that map I was talking about. You know, for Tennessee, we kind of have this idea of growing chapters really for the simplest of purposes, and that is to have more, you know, grassroots and more teams in communities across Tennessee that try to carry that electric vehicles are great for all of us message. And mostly the blue you see here are kind of one potential vision we have of hopefully having more chapters in Tennessee in the next few years that can work collaboratively with whomever else they need to in the community to have a great opportunity for local citizens to learn about EVs. And I think that's my last one, Shauna. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. So like I said, the majority of our webinar today is going to be review of the event guide itself. So let me escape out of here and swap over to the document. Jonathan, can you just quickly confirm you can see what I'm seeing here?
Yes, ma'am, can.
And I'll zoom out a little bit. Is this all still legible?
It is for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. If anybody has any problems with that, just type it in the chat box and Virginia can kind of relay it to me and I can change the view. But this is the electric vehicle ride and drive event guide. You can see it has the names of the people that were responsible for providing feedback to this task force. And I'm just going to pause here quickly on the table of contents so you can kind of get a very quick view of what is all included in here. Our goal here wasn't to be exhaustive to the point of intimidation or anything like that. A lot of these tips and tricks are taken from all of the people that you saw above, as well as feedback from other types of EV owners, clubs, other representatives that have held these types of ride and drives in the past. So we have some event prep checklists that kind of walks you through in the general order that you need to complete certain activities, all of the things that you need to make sure you do ahead of time before the actual event itself. Some item inventories in terms of what we would recommend you have on hand at a minimum to be able to make sure your event is smoothly run. Development of a route safety and logistics plan for your actual event. I mean, you're going to be having moving vehicles in the same space as people that might be standing here, there, and yonder. So making sure that you have a safety plan in mind for that setting. Guidelines for dealership outreach, because dealerships can actually be great partners for getting new EVs that you can, test drive off the line kind of a thing. EV resources and literature, things that you might want to be able to have on hand or at least refer your attendees to if they have more questions about EVs outside of your event. Tracking event vehicles, staff, and volunteers. Tracking event attendees in terms of their engagement level, you're measuring success with your event in terms of getting their feedback, perhaps through the use of surveys. Managing liability in terms of getting photo waivers so you can use photos from the event, as well as liability forms, insurance, things like that to keep your event organizers safe from incident. And then ride and drive social media toolkit, where there's some kind of example posts, information on like different dimensions for visuals that can correspond with posts, things like that to kind of give you a head start in promoting your event online. And then there's a number of appendices that we'll kind of walk through as we go through the document on those surveys, liability waivers, ride and drive promotional flyers, all sorts of things. I'll draw your attention up here that there's a few DET contacts that we want everyone to be aware of. Like I said, DET coordinator Virginia, she's going to be talking with us a little bit later, or at least helping us moderate that Q&A session. But she's an excellent resource if any of you have kind of general questions on DET or any of the projects that we present. And then Jonathan Overly, who just spoke earlier, he's a great resource, particularly when it comes to the liability side of things, because Jonathan and the East Tennessee Clean Fuels Coalition kind of have a unique insurance event insurance model that might be interesting for people who want to plan in the future to replicate. So there's some acronyms that you can go through in your own time. A brief introduction of what this topic is in terms of background on DET and really why we think electric vehicle ride and drives in particular are of great importance. It's because they're low pressure educational environments where people can experience driving an EV perhaps for the very first time, and really have a chance to be demystified about the technology that there's a whole lot of misconceptions about. And when you finally get in an EV for the first time, you realize, you know, it's just like a regular car, but in some aspects, a lot better. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't truly learn until they get a chance to actually, you know, get in the car, interact with people that own the vehicles. So this is a really great opportunity that we, as, you know, DET members, very much see value in continuing to provide in the future. We think that this is one of the most important awareness opportunities for educating the public and promoting EV adoption in all. So one thing I do want to draw your attention to up here is, you know, we know that EV technology is kind of changing as it develops. We have different ranges for old vehicles as compared to new, as well as the proliferation of plug-in hybrid vehicles with the advancement of, you know, new battery electric vehicles. We do think it's important that you see and demonstrate both of them in ride and drives whenever possible. We're talking about trying to have events that might target different income levels, different regions of the state where charging availability might be, you know, different than the looks in downtown Nashville, as well as just making sure that your events, as much as possible, are kind of attracting people from all walks of life. So it's very important that when we're talking about EVs, we're talking about more than just the, you know, long battery range vehicles that might have a starting price tag in the $50,000 bracket, because there's a whole lot of other EVs out there that definitely the public should know about. So going down to the event prep checklist, again, this, I won't be reading any of this off for you. I'll spare you all that. But just to kind of quickly walk through the types of activities that you should be prepared for and make time for ahead of actually hosting an event. That's what this checklist is for. So, you know, compiling your event inventory, getting your route safety and logistics plans settled, making sure that you have identified partners, perhaps local sponsors, other people that you want to volunteer with you, including, you know, local EV owners clubs, local power company representatives, sustainability nonprofits, local governments, people that are going to be great resources for you to support your event. And keep in mind that these types of partners, they might be able to bring their own personal vehicles to demonstrate for people, be able to provide food and drinks in some cases, literature, prizes or swag, or even just volunteers on site to help you run your event. So this is a really important step early on. And then kind of stemming off of that would be, if you really want to make sure that you have EVs that are available for test drive, you should consider reaching out to your local car dealerships. There's many of them that are happy to bring out electric vehicles for test drive for these events, because they see it as a sales opportunity. You know, they're getting a dedicated audience that are interested in that specific vehicle make and model. So, you know, to bring it out there and let people test drive it, you know, oftentimes those dealerships can walk away with a sale. For public events, making sure that you're promoting it so that you get a good turnout, creating online marketing pages, perhaps through Eventbrite or Facebook, just to make sure that you have a good grasp on what your event attendance is going to be. For private events, in cases where it might be, say, an employer that wants your assistance with providing an event to their employees, a public event might not be the best way of doing that. It might be better to have, some kind of email marketing, loudspeaker announcement, etc., to get people to actually come to the event. We do recommend that you share your event details with us, the DET coordinator, Virginia, so we can help you promote it if it is a public event, or help bounce off any questions or things like that to provide assistance to you, because we do want to make sure that these events, when they're being held, are successful. So if you have questions, always welcome to reach out to Drive Electric Tennessee. If you're having presentations, identifying speakers, slideshows, all that is part of it. Making sure that you have waiver forms for the event itself in case of, liability. Securing funding or sponsorships to cover costs of food or drinks. That can range from light snacks to a full lunch. It's not necessary for all events, but it is a good way to get people to attend, particularly at lunchtime, at an employer's office. Hey, if I can get free lunch today, maybe I want to go check out those EVs outside. No less than 1 week out, confirm the availability of all of those dealership representatives, event partners, your volunteers. Make sure that you have all their contact information on hand, including their day of contact. That's something I've been burned by before, where I get, someone's office phone, and then on the day of, while they're traveling, I don't have like a cell phone or way to get them on the horn at that specific moment. So make sure that you have all that information compiled in one place in case you need to give updates. Make sure that you're designating a staff member or volunteer ahead of time to take photos. That seems kind of silly, but it's the one thing that you can very easily use to immediately capture the success of your event. Share with your partners so that they get, digital media value out of it, and they can use in their own promotional materials. And then, post to social media, maybe attract more people throughout the day to your event because they see that it's being, so successful and engaging. So that's really important to have somebody on hand that's going to do that. And then, of course, at the end, making sure that all of your staff members and volunteers well ahead of time understand what the attendee onboarding process is. So it might include, sign in at the tent over here, fill out this pre-drive survey here, sign this photography waiver and liability form, and then you can go over and actually enter a vehicle. But make sure you have to do all those things first before you get in the car. Event kit. Again, these are just events that these are just items that we think are helpful. So the event kit is designed to be something that you could fit in like a tote or, a bag very easily with small items that are really critical to keeping things organized. Duct tape, pens, clipboards, binders, printed versions of the surveys and the liability waivers, table skirts and claws, literature if you're going to be handing anything out, sign-in sheets, contact sheets. Garbage and recycling bags are really important, especially if you're going to be serving food. You want to make sure that you can leave the event space in the condition that you entered it in. And that can be a bummer to forget and kind of have to figure out how to clean up at the end. And then giveaways and swag as you guys might have them available. And then other items, these are larger items that, they're not going to fit in a tote bag, but they're still just as critical to you for organizing. Some of this stuff, if you have a site host that can provide it, they might be able to kind of have this stuff available to you on site already. So it won't necessarily be something that you have to provide, but we do recommend that you have tents, tables, chairs, banners and signs, cones to make sure you can block off certain areas. And then in the case that that you prefer a digital sign-in, digital waivers, as opposed to having written ones, tablets and iPads would be a must. Just keep in mind that outdoor access to electricity for charging purposes is not always really guaranteed. Make sure you flag that early on for site hosts if that's something you plan on doing. So moving on to route safety and logistics. Instead of providing an example plan here for you, what we really wanted to do was make sure that you were able to answer these questions about route safety and logistics. I mean, how familiar are you with the site that you're planning to have this ride and drive? Is it a public or a private space? Are attendees able to freely enter and exit? Because if they're not, you're going to need to be able to provide that information to them through some other means. Are the event organizers the site hosts themselves? Like say you're a state agency and you just plan on having your own ride and drive for your own employees. That might simplify things, but say I'm a state agency that instead wants to have a really big National Drive Electric Week event out at Nissan Stadium, which we've done in the past. In that case, the number of people that we need to be interacting with, engaging with, and getting approvals from really expands. So making sure you kind of understand who all needs to be involved as soon as possible. So you're not like at the last second getting hurdles from someone saying, oh, no, you actually can't do that here. Where will the vehicles be parked? How are you outlining this information for both the vehicle owners that are bringing the cars as well as your event guests so they know where to even report to? Where can guests who are arriving by personal vehicles park? Are they going to be adjacent to the event space, or are they going to be parking somewhere else and having to walk in? Where will those vehicles be driven? Is there a space that you can clearly outline in a parking lot to make sure, the vehicles are only being driven here, they won't be pulled up around where we want our event attendees to be able to stand, those kinds of things. And as there's flexibility with all these kinds of events is also the kind of big takeaway for this. And one thing that we know that can kind of disrupt an event taking place is rain or other inclement weather. So it's a good idea to at least establish a date, maybe a week following the event itself. You could do a rain or dry event and it goes off whether or not it's raining, or if you think that event attendance will be negatively impacted, make sure that you have a date at the start that you can kind of reschedule to quite easily if something like that were to occur. For driving the vehicles, is there a route that you have in mind? And if so, if you're going to be clearly identifying this route, make sure that you have a map on hand that you can give to a dealer's representative or a vehicle owner. And, we really do emphasize, the route is at your discretion, obviously, but a route consisting of only or mostly right-hand turns is definitely the safest. The right-hand turn is not only faster than waiting for a left-hand turn where you have, two lanes of oncoming traffic to contend with, but it's a lot safer because you only have one to contend with. The driver's on the left and they can see very clearly where oncoming traffic is coming from. So for liability purposes, right-hand turn only routes are the safest. Again, it is your discretion, but it's something to keep in mind when you're designing a route. If you're doing digital sign-ins and things like that, Wi-Fi is a must, right? I mean, you don't want to get stuck having a bunch of tablets that nobody can access the surveys on, and therefore they can't begin your event. So make sure that you're going to have signal. Can food and water be brought to the event? And who's going to provide that food, if so, and how is it going to be kept, at a safe temperature for consumption? And then how are you going to be recycling and disposing of that? What is the site host providing, and what is the event organizer providing? So everybody kind of knows up front what needs to be brought day of by whom. What's that plan again for rain or inclement weather? Is there a spot indoors so you can move some stuff if you're going to do a rain or shine type of event? Is the site host able to provide space and equipment for a presentation? Say you want to have a slideshow about EVs and charging infrastructure for all of your attendees at the beginning of your event. That's perfectly doable, but you just have to, do the extra planning for that kind of presentation. What roles do event hosts and organizers have in running the event? Like who is it that's going to be taking photos? Who's going to be making sure that everybody has a sign-in? Who's going to be making sure that the dealers understand how that process works and that they should absolutely not be letting people in their vehicles until they've signed a liability waiver? So who's going to be responsible for what? Bathrooms, where are they? And how available are they to staff and attendees? That's a pretty critical thing, especially for a long event. How do we direct people toward the restrooms if they need it? And, it gets hot in Tennessee. So how are we going to keep everybody hydrated, particularly, again, for those longer events during the daytime? Is water going to be provided at the event, as in like there's drinking fountains nearby, or are you going to have to bring water? Because water, even if you can't provide food and drinks at like the level of a full lunch, water is critical. And you're going to want, if you're holding an event out in the middle of a wonderful park, that's great. But people need to be able to stay hydrated, particularly your volunteers that might be standing hours at a time in the heat. And then insurance considerations. Do the site hosts or event organizers require insurance for the event? And what does that entail? And we'll get back to that later on, but that is a very big question early on, is what is our liability? What can we do to mitigate it? So you want to have these questions on hand when you're designing your route safety and logistics plan. In particular, it might be helpful for you to actually complete a visit to the site well ahead of the event, so you know what the physical location is that you're working with. In a case where you don't have that information or that familiarity with it, definitely be working with the site hosts pretty rigorously so that you can all be on the same page when it comes to making decisions related to that physical event space. And if you are in that position, again, of not being super familiar with the place that you're having the event, you need to, spend a good deal of time early on in that day, making sure you arrive early so that you have time to make changes to the event space at the last minute if you see something that just isn't going to work. Guidelines for dealership outreach. Again, dealerships can be great partners when it comes to actually getting vehicles, a wealth of different types of vehicles available for your ride and drive event. However, soliciting dealership participation does kind of, it can be a little bit tricky in some areas, specifically where there's not a lot of dealers that have electric vehicles on their lots. So it's really best to kind of try and find a great contact at a dealer and be able to rely on that contact for events in the future. When you're getting dealer contacts for the first time, it is really important for people in that specific field that you pick up the phone and call them. You're gonna have a lot easier time explaining what it is you're requesting from them, answering questions that they might have. I mean, they might be on the floor most of the day sometimes. So getting a call instead of sending them an email is probably the best way to make an introduction for yourself. Make sure that they have EVs on their lot. And sometimes they'll sell EVs and they just don't have any right now. That's fair. They might not be getting another EV for a while yet, but you still want to keep their contact information in case their situation changes in the future. If a dealership doesn't have EVs but wants to be involved, you should be focusing on getting dealers that can actually provide you the vehicles that you want to demonstrate to your audience. So make sure that you're kind of emphasizing that for them early on. Consider inviting all of the dealerships nearby that might have an EV on their lot, regardless of manufacturer. I mean, again, what I said at the top is true. It's great to host these events, but the big takeaways from these events should not just be demystifying the technologies, but showing the different shapes and ways that EVs can easily fit into your attendees' lives. In some cases, a BEV is the perfect EV for somebody, even older models that might have lower battery range. But there's quite a few people that would feel a lot more comfortable with the PHEV given their daily driving schedule, or where they're based in Tennessee and charging infrastructure that's available in the area. They just might feel more confident with that kind of technology. And that's all going to vary based on manufacturer. So make sure that you have a good representation of different EV technologies and makes and models as much as possible. So definitely always reach out and ask. It doesn't hurt to do so. You should be kind of considering the demographic of your event attendees in terms of the types of vehicles that your EV owners clubs might already have available to bring to the event. Are there specific manufacturers or vehicle models that you expect your EV owners clubs to bring? In which case, maybe you don't need to bring 3 of them for test drive. as well as, making sure that vehicle lineup is representative of a few of the more common and accessible EVs. Some example of those: Nissan Leaf, Tesla Model 3, the Chevy Bolt. Those are three that are very, very popular. They're certainly not the only ones that would be good, but they're good representatives of the technologies as a whole. PHEVs, they don't make the Chevy Volt anymore, but it is kind of the king of PHEVs in the context of the modern EV. So having something like that available, as well as other newer PHEVs, those are great to also have on hand to show the differences between those types of vehicles. And make sure that you're not, again, just getting the kind of bigger ticket luxury items. Those are all swell and dandy and fantastic to drive. But again, you want to make sure that the event is encompassing more technologies that are available for more Tennesseans. When you're describing an event to a dealer, you need to frame it from like what they're going to get out of it. I mean, emphasizing that it's an opportunity for them to get a few leads on EV vehicle sales. That's a good thing to kind of remind them. Make sure you're getting their contact information. Make sure when you're asking them to send somebody with a vehicle that you're asking for that representative to kind of know about that vehicle and about EVs in general. Some dealerships might even have EV specialists, and those are the great representatives that you want to be available at your event. Make sure that you can accommodate any special requests they might ask to bring their own banners and tents where appropriate. That is all fine and dandy, but you definitely should also emphasize for them that an EV ride and drive is typically brand neutral. It's not focused on competition, but instead collaboration and education. So if they want to bring their own sales materials, I think that that's great in a lot of cases, but just make sure they're aware they're not going to be the only dealer make and model represented, and that they're going to be, in a space engaging openly with vehicles of other makes. And make sure that the EV, when it comes, is as close to fully charged as possible. Some of these EVs, they might have real big ranges. A Chevy Bolt can be around, 220, 230 miles in EV range. But if it comes to the event with only 100 miles left on the battery, that might cut it for the amount of ride and drives that you're doing that day. But it's still freaky for perhaps the first EV experience that an attendee might have to get in a vehicle and see that the battery is already half dead. So definitely emphasize that for them. We want the vehicles to be as charged as possible before you bring them. And then keep their information for the future. Make sure that you're thanking them for their involvement and that, you're communicating to them the value that they brought to your event, as well as how you hope to be able to assist them in the future by connecting them with your EV audiences. EV resources and literature. There's a lot of charging infrastructure resources out there. That's one of the first questions that attendees are going to ask is, how do I charge it? The DET has an EV Charging 101 webpage. There's a lot like it out there, but just make sure that you can all of your volunteers know the difference between level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging. And they can at least kind of direct people toward resources of that nature in the future. If people are interested in finding charging available to them in their area, there's, again, a lot of different tools that are out there and available. The ones that we would recommend your volunteers be able to point your attendees toward would be PlugShare, as well as the Alternative Fueling Station Locator. PlugShare is crowdsourced data. It'll have photos from people who actually drive up and use the charging stations themselves. So PlugShare, and you can download it as an app on your phone, or you can access it on the browser. So PlugShare is a good one for that. The Alternative Fueling Station Locator, that data is more verified. So again, crowdsourced data on the PlugShare stuff, which works and can be a fast way of kind of knowing, the station is maybe someone backed into it overnight and the owner doesn't know yet, but I pulled up and I saw that's not working. The station locator is going to have verified data supplied by the National Clean Cities Coalition Network. So it's going to have more verification in that sense and really easily downloadable data if you're ever interested in that kind of that kind of tool. So, and again, it's available on the browser, so very easy to access and pull up. It's actually recommended that somebody, your volunteer somewhere, has one of those two things pulled up, or at least a map printed from both of those of your nearby area, so you can, when an attendee says, well, there's no charging infrastructure available here, you can just turn your phone around and say, well, actually, it's a good resource in that way. EV model lists, with the amount of EV models that are available in today's market, you're never going to have a ride and drive that has an example from every manufacturer. So a good way of kind of filling in the blanks is to have a complete model list. This one is from Plug-in America. It's one that we recommend because it seems to be updated on a semi-regular basis. And it has the MSRP and the range noted for each of these vehicle models. This is not all of them, by the way. There's more than that, but it's the ones that were included in the snapshots we were able to take. But having something like this printed, so you can easily say, this car over here is the Tesla Model 3 and it has this MSRP, this range, and point to it on your map and say, yeah, and it's kind of like this one and this one that we couldn't have available today, but those are also EVs with a similar range. Having something like that on hand is really important. And then if you do have access to a laptop or something that might be able to play like a video on your event sign-in table while people are kind of waiting to get into the vehicles for test drive, we do have a curated list of EV-focused YouTube videos that are available on the Tennessee Clean Fuels Alternative Fuel Demonstration Library. So we have a link here in the event guide itself, but that is a good resource for kind of a static display while people are waiting to get into the vehicles. So we only have 15 minutes left. I am going to kind of breeze through these last few ones, but that's because the information at the top that we've gone through is kind of the most important for these pre-event planning items. Tracking event vehicles, staff and volunteers, make sure that you have strategies for reaching out to these people on the day of the event, that they're all trained to understand what they're expected to do when they get there, and make sure that once the event closes that you're sending out thank yous to all of these individuals, perhaps even sending them photos of them interacting with the crowd, or in dealers' cases, people interacting with their vehicles so that they can kind of visually see the success of the event and their participation in it. Tracking event attendees, one of the best ways to do this truly is to use surveys. We do recommend pre-drive surveys that people complete before they jump in the vehicles, as well as post-drive surveys that obviously they complete after. Post-drive surveys, you can sometimes do them the day of. I will say it's hard to get people to stick around if they've already signed in a survey, signed a liability form, gotten in the vehicle. They don't necessarily want to stick around and do another survey. So you might need to be prepared to send out that kind of post-drive survey in a digital form within a week or so after the event itself. But with the surveys, we have template surveys for the pre-drive and post-drive surveys. One of the things that you're going to need to decide if you're doing surveys is whether or not you want them to be paper on the day of. That has the benefit of being really easy to just hand to somebody with a clipboard and they can easily complete it super quickly. The con for that is if you're going to be using those survey results, somebody on the back end has to input all that data manually for analysis purposes. Digital surveys, their benefit is you don't have to do that back end work. A lot of digital survey things like SurveyMonkey, there's others available, but they'll all have analysis tools available for you built into the platform. The problem is with some of those, it can be actually difficult sometimes to get people to pause, pull out their phone in some cases, find the website. I'm not saying it's, impossible, but it's just something to keep in mind when you're deciding what survey method you guys are going to be pursuing. Pre-drive surveys are important because they kind of get a gauge on your audience's perception of EVs before they actually encounter them. The post-drive survey is a good way of capturing how their approach to EVs and their level of engagement and trust in the technology, how that changes as a result of you letting them in a vehicle. So that's why it's kind of important to have both in terms of measuring your event's success on changing audience behavior. you can, excuse me, make sure that when you're collecting this data, if possible, you're communicating it to Drive Electric Tennessee. We like to do statewide comprehensive reviews of successful EV events. So if you're collecting this data, we definitely have a use for it, and in terms of showing how these types of events are impacting Tennesseans, and making sure that we're reaching new audiences, and that those audiences are being thoroughly engaged and are becoming more aware of the technology. So again, Virginia's contact information was included up above. That is very helpful for Drive Electric Tennessee to have this kind of a report after the fact. Managing liability, again, it's important for you to secure event coverage for a lot of these kinds of things. And one thing to kind of take a step back, it seems like this is a lot of work, and we understand that it can be kind of daunting to get into the discussion of liability ahead of time. But you know, it seems like it's a lot of work until somebody backs a Tesla Model S into a boulder that's on the side of a, turning lane that they didn't see. Then it really stinks, and you wish that you invested time in making sure your liability was squared away. So it only takes one, even small incident for you to kind of, I really should have done more to make sure that I had answers for these kinds of bumps and bruises and scratches and all that kind of stuff. So secure event insurance. East Tennessee Clean Fuels can offer DET chapters or other Tennessee partners holding these types of events. They can add your event to its general liability insurance for around just $100. And they can add partner entities to that insurance coverage. Say your site host needs to be included, other partners, they also need to be included. And that option can provide over $1 million in insurance to your event. Again, Jonathan's information was included up above. He's going to be the primary contact for that, but that is an option when you're pursuing insurance. Ensure that your test drive vehicles, they're coming with full insurance for their drivers or riders. A lot of the times that means the dealership representatives, they'll usually have full insurance coverage for test drives. I mean, that's how they sell the vehicles on their lot too. But make sure that they have that information and can confirm that that's the case. Also know that in some areas, there might be EV owners that are willing to let people ride and drive in their personal vehicles, in which case it's even more important that you have proof of insurance, that they understand and accept the risks, and that your riders are aware of that situation. So make sure that that's all squared away well ahead of your event itself. And then develop a waiver that all drivers and riders, that does include your volunteers, representative staff, all of that they have a waiver that they sign and complete before entering an EV. And I say entering an EV, I don't mean test driving one, I mean getting in one at all. Say they have a coffee in their hand and they spill it. Who's liable for that if they, glitch out some electronic in the car? Make sure that they've signed a liability waiver before they get in the vehicle, period. And we do have examples of what those waivers look like at the end as appendices. Social media toolkit. I'll go through this very, very briefly, but it just has some tips on identifying your audience, developing visuals and hashtags that you can use on your social media platforms. There's some dimensions here for the different types of visuals that you can upload to each of these platforms that you should try and keep to when you're developing your visual materials. Making, some guidelines on how often to post, what kinds of content you want in there. If you're using long URLs, shorten them with something like bit.ly to save characters on the post, especially something like Twitter where your characters are counted. And then timeline for when you're going to be putting these materials out, as well as draft posts that you can kind of easily drag and drop, your time of day, the types of vehicles you're going to have, your organizing information and hashtags, all of that. And then what you should be doing on the day of the event to continue to build up the promotion. That might include posting day of photos, trying to get people to come out more as the day goes on. You could even include live streaming, and that is something that you'll have to be talking with your volunteers about, how you want to live stream an event as it happens. And then with your post-drive survey, take that opportunity to thank attendees and sponsors. At that time, especially if you're doing it like a post-drive survey that you're sending to your attendees a week out from the event itself, you can also make sure that they have the social media resources, the photos, everything that was posted, that they can kind of find that easily for themselves if they want it. And then all of this stuff at the back, this enters the appendices with the post-drive, pre-drive surveys. There's 2 versions of liability. This is a general release of liability, an indemnity agreement. And then there's a version of this document that has both the photo waiver and a release from liability within the same document. There's some example flyers that you can use when you're trying to promote your materials, as well as a sample press release. So haven't left us too much time for Q&A, so I apologize for that. But going back to that, Virginia, do you want to rattle off any burning questions that we received? And at this time, I'll welcome everybody to hop on their cameras if you wish. We can begin to unmute people that might have specific questions for the group, as well as people that might have answers, someone like Marty, who is, of course, an example of a person that's held these kinds of events before. Everyone feel free to kind of chip in, provide your own experience. But Virginia, could you please read off a question for us?
Hello there, everyone. Jonathan, I believe, has a couple of questions that he would like to ask. Jonathan?
A couple of good things to point out, Shauna. I will be as brief as I can here. One, I think most people know we're part of the DOE Clean City system, and one of the benefits we have is having a lot of other coalitions that do great work. And just seeing Michael Staley from Alabama's face made me recognize that they do a great job with something called a media coverage report. I can kind of quickly, I printed this and have this sitting around my office for me to refer to, but that's something that Shauna, in future versions, we probably ought to just talk to them a little bit and get a paragraph or 2 on how they do that and include that. That's one thing. And then one item just in the run of discussion that we had here, I'm not sure we have it verbatim in this document. We should probably add it, but just know that you are a whole lot better putting yourself in the middle of a bunch of people than thinking you have a fantastic event with a lot of vehicles and making people come to you. So there's lines of what you can and can't do depending on how you make a plan. But 9 times out of 10, unless you have some incredible attraction to where you are better off trying to have your ride drive where other people already are than putting it out in the middle of, where there may not be a lot of people get them to come to you. One other question was on EAA chapters. Someone posed, what if I don't know what chapters are near me? So I put a link in the chat to be able to find what EAA chapters exist in your state. And then I want to get to Jennifer's question. Jennifer asked, what about a ride and drive versus a ride and learn? And I guess, Jennifer, you can open up your mic if you want to, but people will give different events a different name depending on where they are and what kind of, words they may want to use. I think typically the question is, are you going to have people being able to actually drive the cars or ride in them, or even be able to get in them at all? Each of the types of events is a good way to educate people. The more you can get not just the butt in the seat, but someone driving it, that's where you really change people's minds. That's my experience and what I've heard from other people. But let me defer to you, Jennifer. If you have another way you want to ask that question or part of it, please feel free.
No, that's right. I just know that I think it was due to liability, the events that we've posed or hosted in the past, we've done as ride and learns. And I just was curious if, y'all had from your vast experience, data or opinions about whether, that's fine, but it's really like, kind of like you were saying, like, it's really golden if you can push the envelope a little bit and get folk and, host an event where folks can get behind the wheel. So that's helpful. Yeah. If anybody else has opinions on that, and I can advocate for that if I know that it's like way more effective to do.
Jennifer, I can talk to that a little bit. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. There's been so many times where I've started talking and they said, hey, you're muted, that now I just ask on the front end. Yeah, to that point, Jennifer, I've actually had interesting experiences where I've had people ride in the car first because they were scared to drive it. And then after riding a little bit, I said, you know what? I said, why don't we pull over and let's swap and you drive it, okay? And the difference in their reaction in those two things is night and day. I mean, it really is. When they're riding, they're kind of like, oh yeah, it's quiet. It's cool. I like it, yeah. But then when they drive it, they're like, wow, especially when they punch the accelerator or when they feel the, the regenerative braking kicking in, because that's a sensation that really, you don't really fully appreciate that unless you're driving the vehicle. You're easing off the accelerator and the car is slowing down for you. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing to some people. So yeah, I think it's a big difference between just riding versus driving.
And I will add, Jennifer, that we all have to work within the real world confines we have. And I understand if, depending on the organization, sometimes there's going to be like a rule laid down and you don't have a choice. But last October, we worked with TTU and with, for one of the events, KIVA, the Knoxville Electric Vehicle Association, and did 2 in-person ride and drives. We spaced the cars out. Folks had to sign their forms. When they signed their forms, they had to use some hand sanitizer, or as my now 16-year-old calls it, sand sanitizer. And then they also had to wear masks to get in the vehicles. Most of the vehicles we had for drive availability were actual individual owners. If those individual owners had not wanted to do that, then we wouldn't have done it. But with their approval, we were able to do that. So there may be some cases where that could be the circumstance in Nashville, Jennifer, with the right, EV owners that were open to that. As long as they clean them afterwards, then it can be okay. But each group probably has some limitations. You just have to live with them. But you're better off doing a ride and learn or something that a vehicle and learn or a showcase than you are not doing anything at all.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Virginia, do you have another question for us?
I have one. Let me ask one real quick, but also thank you, Michael Staley. It sounds like for folks that are watching the chat that he's willing to share one of his reports. Michael, if you take one of those and for any reason block out some information that you need to, if you want to share that with us, we would happily include it as an appendices in ours, but let us know and I will contact you later on to get the little details from you.
Great. I'm happy to do that. I guess that's kind of internal documents to us, but we're happy to share if it'll help some folks. And I think we probably have a pretty good example. We might redact a little bit of the information, but happy to do that. Glad to help.
So one of the questions, Shauna, is for the day of an event, how many staff members will I need? And I think that points to, number one, you've got to kind of figure out for your event, but hopefully plan ahead with the idea that you may have a big crowd there. And the more you can get volunteers to help even pass out simplified information, the waiver, the vehicle information form, especially if you get busy, the more you can kind of line up some volunteers, then hopefully that day those volunteers can help you and make sure people get attended to. But then also if you don't have a lot of people and those volunteers may or may not be really EV educated folks, they turn around and get an opportunity to learn at vehicles. And with that, I'll stop and see if anybody else has thoughts on how many staff people you need for an event.
Mhm. I think another interesting way to look at this is how many vehicles do I need to bring too? If you're expecting a large event where you might have hundreds of people attend, there's some easy kind of back of the napkin notes that you can take in terms of how many people can fit in one vehicle, about how much time does it take for a test drive to be accomplished, because and then like how many hours do I have in general with like breaks built in for the dealers themselves, because it can happen where you have people standing in a line to try and get in the vehicles and there's none there because they're all being driven at the time. So then that would be, to kind of Jennifer's point, the value of having some static vehicles too. And people sitting with them while the other vehicles are being driven. So kind of an interesting angle on that question, but it's really important for you to be trying to estimate what your attendance is going to be for your actual audience and go from there to make sure you're doing the math on the number of vehicles that you want. And that, I think it's good to at least have 2 to 3 people on hand at an event, even a small one, that know kind of totally what's going on. People from your organization, if you're the event organizer, that are able to attend, because you're going to need to go to the bathroom, you're going to need to go take a drink or something, and you don't want to be away from your table when other people might be trying to sign up. So I would say at least 2 to 3 people, even for a small event, and then scale up from there.
And then real quick, sorry, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, what I was going to say about that was sometimes, as you're signing up these vehicles, you end up with a lot of Tesla owners, because obviously Teslas are the most common EVs out there. Don't turn them away. Don't say, hey, we've already got 4 Teslas, we don't need any more. Because what we've discovered at the Ride and Drives is people come to see the Teslas. I mean, really, that's the draw. When we participated with the Knox Auto Show last February, which was BC before COVID, we had people lined up 20 deep to test drive Teslas, and I didn't have anybody lined up to test drive my Volt. So I'm going up there and I'm basically, grabbing people by the arm and like, hey, look, you're going to be waiting 40 minutes to drive a Tesla. Come drive the Volt first, just for fun. And so I had to talk people into it, and they had a great time. They had fun. But anyway, Teslas are the big draw. So don't turn those away.
And Teslas, well, they'll have the name recognition that a lot of the other EVs won't. People might come up and say, Chevy has an EV. I didn't know that. Take a drive in one. It's got, maybe the same MSRP or the same range. It's, there's other benefits to these other types of vehicles. So, to Marty's point, people they're going there for the vehicles that they recognize. But the bigger point of that Ride and Drive is to say, yeah, look at that vehicle, but look at all these other ones too. Aren't they all cool? So.
Another thread was Karen Apple and George Clark. Thank you both for commenting. Karen, I think you will find dealerships that want to come and bring a vehicle and a person and get as many people in that vehicle and driving it. And you will find other dealerships, for whatever reason, because it's a Porsche Taycan, or it could even be a Bolt or a simple car, that go, no, we don't want to do that. They're worried about liability. They have some other issue. So it really depends on the local dealership, and as you develop a relationship with them as to what they're going to want to do for an event. Every once in a while, they have a very educated person that goes to that car, and then that person is gone and they're sending a backup. And so for whatever reason, they don't want that person in the car because they're worried they're not going to operate it correctly. So you really don't know what you're going to get from a dealership. You just have to do that outreach and kind of ask for the moon and try to tell them you want to help them sell cars, but expect a variety of outcomes. Also, to Karen's question about how long for an event, I think that depends on the team you're working with and where. The more often you can do it, the longer you're there, especially if we're talking something like a Saturday, probably the more opportunity you have to reach people. It does depend on where specifically you are. If you're near a farmer's market that's going to be there from 8 to noon, and then the rest of the market leaves at noon, sure, you could stay nearby and be there beyond that. But a lot of the other traffic you were going to capture is probably leaving with the market. So it just depends on what kind of your event you're designing. I think in most cases for stuff that I participated and seen, most people have something that's 3, 4, 5 hours maybe. when you get into all day stuff, either you have some other kind of big event going on, like you're part of an auto show, or it's a local festival or Earth Day event, and they're there almost all day anyway, or they may be there from 12 to 7, and you go and you're there from 12 to 7 just because you're part of that event. But it's up to the group. As long as you think you're going to have people coming by and you've got people that want to spend the time, that's fantastic. Stay there and educate people and collect information. Also, Susan said a few moments ago, what was it? Yeah, we had 25 different volunteers at a 2019 Indo event in Knoxville. And that was one where we were, and hats off to Susan. I think she did a lot of the organizing for that. We were quite organized. Paperwork, we had a registration booth, and I think that's pretty much how we want to repeat stuff that at least we do in the future, because that's where you can get your waiver. That's where you can ask general questions. That's where you could possibly sign a photo release if it's needed, if it's not included in a waiver. If people have general questions, kind of having that booth so that all the vehicle attendees, whether you're an OEM person or a driver, know, oh, before you can get in the vehicle, if you will, go to the survey registration booth and they'll check you in there. You'll get everything you need, and then you come back and we'll take off. Or it's just kind of a point of reference, and it's certainly a place where you need several volunteers, so you've always have got somebody there to be able to answer questions.
So we are a little bit over. I think I'm happy to keep going if we have more questions, but I don't know if there's other event organizers that need to sign off at this time. Virginia, Jonathan, let me know if you want to keep going.
We're good.
Okay. Awesome. Well, in case anybody does have to hop off, I just want to thank everybody for attending, and definitely let us know if you have questions. But Virginia, are there other Q&A questions that we have queued up?
There was a comment about vehicle types and getting those to the events. What are some of the challenges that you have? What are the biggest challenges that you've had with your ride and drive events?
I think one of the bigger challenges that you can face, particularly if you want dealers to be kind of your primary resource for bringing the EVs, is that it might vary a lot by manufacturer what's going to be available in your area. So, you know, I'm in Nashville, and we have it quite lucky where there's a lot of different dealerships available in the area, and a lot of the dealers do have EV models. So it's relatively easy to get dealership engagement in a place like Nashville. You go out to kind of, you know, more rural areas or even just suburban areas, and there might be a little bit more difficulty in making sure that there's dealers in the area that do have the EVs accessible. And that's obviously a goal for DET in the future, is just to make sure that people aren't having to drive an hour and a half out of the way to get to an EV that they can buy. But at this point, you know, in some places that is going to be a difficulty. In those cases, definitely lean on your EV owners clubs in the area, your EAA chapters. Refer to Drive Electric Tennessee. Reach out to us and say, I'm trying to plan an event in Jackson, but I don't know if there's really any dealers available in my area that are willing to drive out with their EV. Can you help me try and find other people in my area that might have vehicles that I can show, even if maybe they don't want to have them test driven? And we can help you maybe even identify fleets in the area that have EVs in their fleet that might be able to provide them, as well as particular EV owners in your area. If you have questions about that, there's a variety of resources. DET can at least help you get connected with folks if you're in areas where, you know, maybe there's not as much dealership penetration.
I think another issue with dealers, and Jonathan, you and especially Susan Goodwin, who's in the chat today, can probably talk more about this than I can. But there's been issues in the past with getting dealer involvement on Saturday events. Because Saturdays are really big days on the lot at dealership for making sales. And so sometimes they don't like to give up their staff to go do a ride and drive event. I'm not sure that there's necessarily strategies for that other than, you know, don't hold an event on a Saturday, but Saturday is obviously kind of the logical day for doing these kinds of events. So Jonathan, Susan, I don't know if you'll have anything to add on that, but that was just something that I think that we've run into in the past.
It's a good point, and Susan, speak up if you want to add to it, but it's just true. That's their biggest sales day of the year. So it is something you have to watch out for if you're every once in a while. And the nice thing about at least National Drive Electric Week is you've got that whole week in between the 2 weekends. So every once in a while, it really can be a good opportunity to do something on a Wednesday or of a Thursday in town, like in Knoxville, as Marty said, which I love, BC, before COVID. I mean, you'd see a lot of people going downtown on a Thursday, and there were a couple of places where you have room for about 10 vehicles. And if you went through the proper channels with the city, you could just set some vehicles up. You probably wouldn't do a ride and drive, it'd be more of a show and tell. But you might have, I mean, thousands of people coming downtown walking by that you could at least let them sit in and look at. So there are some variations and some difficulties you have to work around sometimes. And dealerships on Saturdays can be one of those.
And Jonathan, there was, I think at the Knox Auto Show, wasn't there a situation where we had a Bolt that a dealer provided? So they provided the vehicle, but they wouldn't provide a staff member. And so we actually ended up doing ride and drives in that vehicle using, our volunteers, not someone from the dealership.
That's right. I was one of a handful of people that, because the dealer just dropped it off, they approved us offering rides and drives in it. And then we, kind of shared hours to let other people drive it. And I think we mostly followed your path, Marty, for trying to keep with right turns, but.
Yeah.
Another thing just to keep on the lookout for as a potential last second hiccup, some of these dealerships might only have one EV on the lot. And if they happen to sell that EV, but 3 days before your event, it's highly unlikely that they'll be able to provide a vehicle that day. It's not something that you're going to encounter all the time, but it is kind of good practice in that sense to have a backup, say, EV owner that will have that vehicle available to, in the case that the dealer at the last second just doesn't have a car to show.
Yeah, and Susan just put something in the chat with a lot of different experiences based on working with dealers. My favorite one in here was the dealer that sent an ICE vehicle, so they had to send it back.
Yeah, and that's part of the dealership engagement guidelines is, again, really hammering home, this is an EV event. Don't bring like your Bolt and the Corvette. Like, we're just doing EVs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, Marty, we say sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple of folks, and Karen asking another question about how often you do ride and drives. There was also a comment elsewhere about what do you do during COVID times. You've got to figure out what you think you can do in your community. My hope is certainly during Drive Electric Earth Day coming up in about 3 months, we do a couple events, at least one big event in the Knoxville area. Certainly to the point of if you are in Jackson or Memphis or Nashville or anywhere else in the state, Athens, and you want to do an event and you have questions, you're welcome to call Virginia or someone else. Shauna, you're welcome to reach out to her and we can have that discussion. I think really it's about, if you can plan the ride and drive, first of all, is what kind of vehicles you're going to get there. If you've got to tackle the vehicles, because if you end up with 2, it's probably not much of a ride and drive and it may be more of a learning experience. It all just depends on where you're going to be. Generally, you probably want to be shooting for like 10 or more vehicles. And in some areas that already have an EAA chapter, it may be a little bit easier to do that because there's already a network of owners in the area. In certain places in Tennessee and other places across the country, if there's no glue holding a group of people together somewhere, whether it's EAA or whatever else it may be, you may not have that network and that list of people. So that's kind of a key thing, that as you develop a group in any city or area, you need a list of the people that own EVs in that area that want to participate. And that's one of the tools that's kind of been the little toolkit for us as we develop chapters across the state. I think the good news in any state is that the use of EVs is growing. And unless you were in a really rural area, they're there. You just have to figure out how to get to those people. Is there a Tesla Facebook group around that community? Is there an EAA chapter there? If you don't have that, are you working with anybody at the state level that might help you figure out how many EVs period are in that county or a couple of counties? You might even try to figure out what some communication channels are in general to the area, the local newspaper. Could it be a chamber of commerce? You know, what is some way where you could start reaching people just to say, hey, if you have an EV, we want to know who you are and want you to be part of a chapter for this area. Let's see if we have any other things we can try to answer.
While you're looking at that, Jonathan, I'll just throw this out there. I would, yes, dealers can be really helpful. And so absolutely reach out to them, but never ever underestimate the importance of having owners there. I think owners are actually much better at connecting with folks a lot of times than dealer reps are. Because someone is willing to, hey, this is someone who spent their own money on this car and they're out here telling you about it. And that's really powerful. And then some of us really nerd out on this. Like, for example, Gary, is it Bolmer that's got the blue Tesla in Kiva? One of them. And he actually has little toy Hot Wheel versions of his car that he bought. And so when someone rides in the cars, especially if it's a kid that rides in the car, whatever, he'll give them a little toy car that looks like the Tesla, and of course the parents just eat that up. They love that. And then a lot of us actually have like business cards that we created that have our name and number on it. And we hand those to people after they've ridden or driven our car, just so if they have questions in the future, they can actually contact an owner. And so I just, I don't think you can underestimate the importance of that.
Yeah, I think that's Gary Mayfield, but because he's got a blue,
yes,
so
Mayfield.
I don't know, he found a batch of blue little Tesla Model 3 to hand out. But George Clark mentioned Tesla owner groups are better than Tesla salespeople. As in terms of local dealerships, I think you can pretty much wipe Tesla off your list because your odds, I mean, go ahead and try the outreach, but usually they are not going to do much for you. So the owners groups are much better, and that could take its that could be a way you could reach out. By Facebook is the first one I would know, George, or if anybody else another way to try to reach a Tesla owners group, unless you know somebody in the group. That's the easiest way I know of. I believe you can probably look up Tesla owners groups across the country somewhere to try to find what kind of groups may be in your area. But then that also gets to something that Susan mentioned, is that she said Jack joined a bunch of different EV model specific Facebook groups as a way to do outreach. So, and there's probably some people that don't use Facebook on here, love it or hate it. It's pervasive almost, unless we've turned it down or you haven't let your son or daughter have an account yet. But there are so many people on it, and that's a great and perfect example of a way for a discussion group. There's some people that may use other tools other than Facebook to do that. So, WhatsApp, and there could be other examples where people share information, just don't do it in Facebook. And so George notes that Facebook and Instagram typically have the largest followings. But yeah, with different variants of COVID coming on now, it seems like slowly but surely all of us are going to be getting our vaccinations if we haven't already over the coming months. But yeah, I think everybody will have to decide for themselves the value of doing an in-person event and letting people do drives, at least for the foreseeable future. Hopefully our vaccines cover all the variants that we're finding in the coming months and years. Yeah. But
with that being said, Jonathan, one thing that the Tennessee Clean Fuels Coalitions did recently was work with the Southeast Alliance for Clean Energy, SACE. We put together a virtual EV ride and drive, and that was a virtual drive in a Tesla Model 3, and it had some brief cameos from Kent Minot of the Knoxville EV Owners Club, and he showed off, I believe it was his Nissan Leaf. So That is a good resource for kind of your in the meantime EV engagement. That is a video that we're going to have available on that Tennessee Clean Fuels YouTube channel that I was talking about earlier. So, you know, while we're kind of waiting for the vaccines to reach a certain threshold before some people feel comfortable with doing the ride and drives themselves, there are a few virtual resources showing off the vehicles that you can kind of plug for your various audiences if you're interested.
And another quick point, Alexa Wojtek noted that if you are doing dealer outreach, if you get a couple committed, it may help you in terms of telling the next ones that you're talking to, well, we've already got, you know, these others coming. So just so you know, we really hope you're there too. We don't want to not have, you know, Chevy shown while Nissan and Hyundai are there or something like that. So you can use that as a little leverage if you want to. Let's see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, Jonathan, basically you're talking about building the FOMO there, right? You know, the fear of missing out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's see here. Yeah, so Karen, it looks like you actually saw some of what Dory Larson with Southern Alliance for Clean Energy has done. She does a very good job. She's kind of got the whole ball of wax there. They do a pretty good job with the video. She's got a good voice to hear. Her husband often ends up being in there. You can hear him really well too. They kind of show equipment as well as the vehicles, and even in this one video we did recently, the self-driving Tesla kind of going around a corner with her husband, extremely nervous as he didn't have his hands on the wheel, which would have been me too. But yes. And then another good point from Susan, depending on the local EAA chapter or group, in times of COVID, you may want to look at doing other things. And what Kiva, the Knoxville Electric Vehicle Association, did fall 2020 was they did a series of webinars that addressed different topics. And I think she's saying that's at knoxev.org. You can see, or she says site's still under construction, but hopefully Eric will get some videos loaded, and you might even be able to look for those online because I think they may be on YouTube already, or are they on the AFDL? I wonder if Daniel.
There's a link on the knoxev.org website to
Okay.
all of the Indu videos that were from last fall.
Okay.
Including one I did that I'm going to plug talking about used EVs. So.
Well, I don't think I see any more questions. People are welcome to unmute themselves and ask other points. I think we've roughly kind of discussed all of this stuff. Any other thoughts, I guess, that anybody has in general about a ride drive? And while you think about that, I will say, yeah, I mentioned early on the X's for the in the table of contents for the appendices. There's still a few things we plan to tweak in this, and certainly anybody that gets to look at this document, even when we make a few more edits and we post it in a month, if there's something you see missing, let us know. Because hopefully by the end of the year, we may have several iterations of this come out, but we'll have something that's fairly, it's not going to be absolutely cover every single topic, but it won't take us very long to update a Word document, turn it into a PDF or whatever we post on Drive Electric Tennessee that can be a future reference.
Mm-hmm. And in that vein, we will be following up with this information with all of our webinar registrants and attendees. So if you want to take a closer look at these documents or slides in the future, just know that the recording of this webinar, as well as direct links to those resources, will be provided to you through email with whatever email account you registered for this webinar for.
So I don't see any other questions, Shauna.
All right, well, in that case, I am just going to thank everybody again for sticking through with us, especially 20 minutes after our end date. So I really do appreciate everybody joining us today. If you have more questions, definitely reach out to us. Again, Virginia's information and then the general DET contact information is shared on this slide here. You should also be able to access our contact information very easily by just going to DriveElectricTN.org in case you have any other burning questions. But I hope everyone stays safe and is enjoying the rest of their January 2021. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Everything should be on the DET website. It may take us a few days to do so, folks, but even the video recording will get loaded there.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.